No Ellie yet?
We're live.
All right, thank you. We're gonna wait for Alderwoman Tierney to get on. She's working on it. So is she getting on Zoom? Okay. So I'm gonna try to end this by 4:30.
Oh no.
Still don't see Ellie on there. Oh, there she is. Hi, Ellie.
Hello.
You're muted.
I kept typing ENV instead of EVN or whatever. Oh, God. Yikes.
Well, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. I guess I'll call to order Environmental Matters Committee meeting for May 20th. All the committee members are present, Alderwoman Tierney and Alderman Barnett. And I would like to request, see if anybody would like to make a motion to amend the agenda. Planning and Zoning does have a update prepared on their development update, and I'd like to add them on there for a quick update. If somebody,
I'll make that amendment, but do we have that as an attachment?
I don't believe so.
No, it's not attached to the agenda. That was my fault. I left that off, but we have it here, so it'll be on the screen once you guys are presenting it.
That would work.
I can email it to you though.
Yeah, please do. Is it online? I found the April one.
That's the one.
That's the one. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I made a motion to amend the agenda.
So I'll second that motion.
All those in favor of amending the agenda to add planning and zoning presentation on development updates, please say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. And we also have some minutes on the agenda from
Move
February
approval.
19th.
Move approval of the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. So for the agenda, we have, let's see, a discussion about the Watershed Restoration Fund / fee. And hopefully we have some folks on here. Looks like some names I don't recognize. Hopefully that's them.
That's
who can give
David,
us
yes.
some information on that. I'd like to spend, hopefully no more than half an hour on that. And then we could go into because there are some things with legislation I want to talk about, 0820, the harbors and waterfront areas. So when are we going to find for that and some of our other updates? So with that, who is here to speak about the stormwater fee?
That is me, Dave Hyder from Stand
All
Up.
right.
Hi, Robert. My colleague, Matt Freiberg, is with us as well.
Great. Welcome.
Hello again.
Hi, Alderman Arnott.
Hi. I've got
Hi.
your presentation right in front of me.
All right.
Did you want to put this on the
up.
screen? Did you guys want to put the presentation on the screen?
Yeah, I think that'd be good for the public.
Okay.
Yeah, they should.
Okay, coming up.
And I did, for full disclosure, I did listen to your presentation during the Finance Committee meeting, but I thought
Okay.
it'd be a good opportunity to hear it again, but also perhaps get into some more details. I have some questions for you about various things.
Sure.
And I know the committee members had a lot of other things on their mind when they're hearing this at the Finance Committee meeting.
Certainly.
So with that, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I can certainly keep it to, I'll try to keep it to like 15 minutes. And since it's somewhat of a review, we have added a few more slides to try to provide a little bit more context in terms of the impacts to various property types. So if we can, in terms of the agenda, if we go to the next slide, just a little bit of background, we'll talk about, there's really two key components to the study, which is the financial plan development and then looking at the actual fee structure. And so we'll start with a little bit of background. Just oftentimes stormwater systems are out of sight, out of mind. And you do have an extensive stormwater system in the city of Annapolis, and you can see the attributes here. 58 miles of stormwater mains, 2,500 catch basins, 2,000 manholes, and so on. So certainly a significant stormwater system. And as you're all well aware, that the requirements to manage the system are becoming ever more stringent. And so we need to make sure that we have adequate funds and that folks are charged appropriately for the service that's provided. So the next slide just has a little bit of background in terms of the study. So most recently in April of 2018, the city did receive its new MS4 permit, which has significant new requirements. In concert with that, we were hired back in the fall of 2018 to complete an initial study. And one of the recommendations in that study was to increase the stormwater fee by 2% for the current fiscal year. And then also to look at your fee structures for how you charge for stormwater. The city did adopt the 2% increase in the stormwater fees, but it was determined that a little bit more study was required before you modified your structure. So that's it on the background. In terms of our scope of work, as I mentioned, there's really, on the next slide here, there's really two key components. The first is a financial plan development, and what that is to look at your current costs and your forecasted cost of providing stormwater service, seeing how those costs compare to your current revenues, both now and in the future, and seeing if they're sufficient, and then developing a financial plan to make sure that you have a sustainable stormwater system. And then the other component, which I think is of most interest to most folks, is how do we structure the stormwater fee? So we've evaluated the updated impervious area data, looked at some alternative structures, and then we're kind of in that phase now where we're helping potentially move towards the implementation of a new fee structure. So the first section here, the financial plan, I'll try to keep this portion brief, the financial analysis. So the way we look at this is we have built and continue to maintain for the city a financial model that looks at over a 10-year period. And that essentially gives us the revenue requirements of the system, so the costs on an annual basis of maintaining the stormwater system. So we use the fiscal year 20 and 21 budgets and look at the expenditures on a line item by line item basis and forecast those forward. And then we also look at your capital improvement plan, which is really driven by your MS4 compliance costs, as well as retrofit projects. So then we compare those revenue requirements year over year with your revenues, how much revenue you're going to generate from your current stormwater fees, both now and in the future. And then we have some metrics that we want to make sure we're maintaining minimum balances and we're meeting any debt service coverage requirements. So next slide shows what the stormwater revenue requirements for fiscal year 21 look like. You can see they're really dominated by cash funded capital. So 1.5 million for capital projects. You've got $870,000 in operations and maintenance expenditures, and then about 1% for just a little bit of existing debt that you have on the system. So that makes up the expenditures. And then on the next slide, if we roll that forward, again, looking over a 10-year period, we can see those operating expenditures. You can see on the next line your cash funded capital year over year, and these are all in $1 million. See your little bit of existing debt. So we total all those up, and second from the bottom line shows your total stormwater expenditures year over year. And the important comparison here is that when we compare your revenues from your stormwater fees with your expenditures, you can see that there's a pretty significant delta there. It is important to note that this is assuming that you cash fund all of those capital projects, which has a pretty significant impact on the annual cash needs. So if we were to play this forward, one of the metrics...
David.
Yes.
Question about the last
Sure.
one. What was the jump from in FY22 for total capital expenses?
That's a couple of projects. It's I remember off the top of my head, I may misspeak, but it's the Truxton project and the Truxton pool, I believe, were the two main ones. So we have about $1 million a year in just annual MS4 projects, but in fiscal year 22, there were some additional projects related to Truxton that were included in the budget.
Probably the only two. I mean, there was some stormwater associated with that project, but I think there's also the two large restoration projects, Back Creek and Spa Creek, that I know Greenvest was working on. I'm not sure if this is those projects. So that would make sense because the Truxton Park was not that high.
Okay, Matt, do you know can you look in the model for us?
Yeah, Dave, you're correct. It is the Truxton Heights project. It's $2.9 million in 2022.
Truxton Heights?
Yes.
Oh, that's an infrastructure project, right? New storm drain system?
I believe so. Yep.
And is that in Alderman Arnett? Is that in this year's budget? I mean, I'm asking because now that I think about it, that's a brand new closed storm drain system. That's actually not going to be contributing whatsoever to our MS4 TMDL requirements.
I'm going there. I'm going to the budget binder right now. Water fund, capital budget, watershed. All right. So stormwater management retrofit. Yeah, Truxton Heights is in the CIP. It's page 57 of the CIP. And it is a big amount in fiscal 22, almost $3 million.
What page did you say?
Page 57 of the CIP.
Okay, I'm almost there. There we are. All right. Oh, yeah. I see FY 2022, 2.9. Now, this has it listed as bond money, not PAYGO coming from our watershed fund. So,
Correct. Yeah.
why is that included in this spreadsheet?
Yeah. So this is a kind of a status quo. If we were to assume that you cash fund, and then I'll show you in a moment what we do. The anticipation is that you would bond fund a portion of your capital projects going forward.
But your model here estimates that total capital expenses, and that's capital expenses is that for just the watershed restoration fund?
It is. Yep. But
Okay.
A portion of those capital expenses would be bond funded.
Okay, okay. So you're saying that 4.68 million includes this 2.9 million
Correct.
in the CIP, which is bond.
Correct.
And
So if I go to page 57, when it says watershed restoration and there's, Okay, it's meant to say watershed restoration bonds, or are they not showing the watershed restoration allocation? Do you know what I'm asking?
It is bonds. It's bonds.
It's all bonds.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what it's showing below the
And
line.
the total value of the project is here then? It should be. So to Rob's point, where is if we're getting any sort of points for this?
I don't see how we could if it's a brand new closed storm drain system.
Really?
Because it gets no water quality treatment. So that kind of begs the question is, so this is watershed restoration bonds, but I presume that those bonds are being leveraged off of our watershed restoration fund.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if I'd like to learn more about this. I'm kind of growing a bit worried about this because essentially we're potentially using up some of our capabilities for securing bonds with our limited watershed restoration funds. Presumably, this looks to be a large amount for what is a closed storm drain system. I don't think that's a wise use of our funds, but I'm willing to hear from Public Works. Are they on the?
Yeah, I can tell you more. This is the ongoing issue with the drainage from the adjacent two problems. One from Enclave coming down and flooding the one side of Silipana, and then Admiral Heights, which was not done before stormwater control. So they get flooded at Truxton Heights. So this is this year, fiscal year 21. That money is for an RFP to go out and define, basically the cost, et cetera. And I don't know if the RFP. I know the RFP is written. I don't know the status of it, but that's the plan for next year. Is going to be the procurement and the design.
Yeah, I mean, typically that money for this is more of a traditional capital improvement project as opposed to watershed restoration. Kind of Alderman Arnett, I'm curious what your thoughts are from your experience with the Finance Committee, but this just seems a bit misplaced in terms of using our bond capacity from the watershed fund on this kind of a project.
Well, I'm trying to. Why do you think it's misplaced?
Well, because again, typically the watershed restoration fund all that money is there to promote restoration and to work towards funding our restoration projects, so we get credits towards our TMDL. Yeah. This takes a big chunk of that potential bond capacity out on this fund and puts it towards this project, which is going to have zero impact on our TMDL credit. But it is potentially going to have impact on us being able to pay for other restoration projects if this is such a large amount of bond funding.
I'm not sure, Rob. I mean, it does say watershed analysis, and I suspect the solution is going to be, drainage that may go into Upper Spa Creek, which would have to be remediated in some way. I mean, we don't know there, but it does. The scope of work calls it a watershed analysis study. So David Jarrell would have to tell us the logic of this.
Is Marcia on this?
I'm not sure if she's caught up on this. I know David was pretty instrumental in finally getting the RFP.
Well, I guess we can move on. Kia, can you see if David, Gerald, or Marcia are available to join our meeting at some point?
They've both been invited. I believe David is on a call. He and Sally, I know that Marcia accepted, so I'm not sure where she is, but I'll send her an email.
Can you touch base with that? We can continue on and let the presentation go forward, but I'm going to have a big question about this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I do want to mention that I think the plan for the bond funding is that I think Jody is planning to use general obligation bonds. And so you wouldn't be using up capacity from a bonding capacity standpoint within the watershed.
Why are we accounting for it in watershed restoration fund then?
Because it's a stormwater project. And so it's just similar to all your other utilities. So for water, sewer, stormwater, you generally do issue general obligation bonds, then allocate the debt service essentially to the utilities. That's a pretty common approach for the city. But that's something we can certainly circle back on.
In the past, for some of these things, we've been doing revenue bonds, but Jody isn't in favor of those because
Right.
of the administrative effort and the very little difference in the rates that we get,
Right.
at least at this point, versus general obligation bonds.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so we can certainly circle back on that. Under this forecast, though, just our initial run was just to say, well, what if we had to cash fund all these projects? And if we go on to the next slide, we would essentially, without any adjustments, so we're on slide 10, if we can advance to that one, we show the what would happen to the fund balance. So you've got a little bit less than $2 million in the fund right now. If you were to not increase the fees, obviously given these shortfalls in the cash funding projects, you would basically deplete all of the funds within the stormwater fund by fiscal year 22. So certainly not a sustainable approach. And so what we have been talking with finance about on the next slide is, you have the ability to use debt to fund capital projects. And so what we're proposing and coming up with is a blend of cash versus and debt to fund the capital projects going forward. So this is essentially where you can see in 22 the big use of borrowing for that project, and then going forward using a combination of cash and debt. But the city generally has a practice of looking at this on an annual basis. So, this blend wouldn't necessarily have to hold every single year. But these are the assumptions that we're making at this point. So on the next slide,
David,
yes.
a question on your assumptions, your modeling again. So do your estimates include those large projects, the Back Creek restoration and the Spa Creek? I believe Greenvest was going to move forward first with the Back Creek project.
Yes. Yeah, we've got,
Okay.
Yep. Those are included. It's basically about $1.5 million a year of capital improvements every single year.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem. Given the needs and the requirements in the system, specifically with the new MS4 permit, it doesn't look sustainable to keep the current stormwater fee. So we do believe that you need to increase the revenues that you're generating from the stormwater fee. And the magnitude of those adjustments year over year is going to be dictated based on how quickly you execute the projects, as well as how you fund them, whether you use cash versus bonds. And as I mentioned, we are proposing a split. And so what it looks like over a 10-year period, using a cash bond split, you'd need about 5% increases per year in stormwater fees. So the revenues that are generated from stormwater fees. But again, that's something that's evaluated year over year. What's being proposed for fiscal year 21 would be a 5% increase in stormwater fee revenue. Okay. So that's the financial analysis. The next is the stormwater fee structure analysis, and this looks at how you actually collect those fees. And just a little bit of background here in terms of the design of stormwater fees. The industry standard approach is to use impervious area as a proxy for contribution and use of the stormwater system. And generally it's because of the fact that the more impervious areas there is on a property, the more stormwater that's generated or potentially generated, and therefore the more contributions to this system. So stormwater fees are typically based to some degree on some type of impervious and some partial.
Hey, David. Hi.
Sure.
Could I interject here?
Sure.
Wait a minute. David, are you going to join us or? Okay, David will join us shortly. He just walked by. But I have a question
Sure.
on this. It came up because of possible inequity between disadvantaged communities and why they would pay more than a gas station or whatever. And I think the argument, and what the common denominator is the footprint of the building regardless. And I think,
Mhm.
I think Rob and Ross, do you remember that conversation?
Yep, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's coming up in a later slide.
It is.
oh, okay. Yeah. Just, yeah, I just want to get to that as far as inequities and the common denominator being the impervious
Right.
footprint. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, we definitely dive into that.
Thanks.
No problem. Okay, so that's the kind of the overview, typical approach. So this is how you currently charge right now. So you really have kind of two categories. You have residential properties, and then you have non-residential. Residential properties, single-family homes, condos, and apartments are all charged $15.30 per quarter, and that charge is applied regardless of the type of single-family, or I'm sorry, the type of residential, whether it's a condo or an apartment. So if you're in a studio apartment, you pay the same as a single-family home. Everybody at $15.30. And then if you're a non-residential parcel, you're placed into 3 tiers, and the tiers are shown here. If you've got 0 to 5,000 square feet of impervious, you pay $61.20, and then 5 to 10, and then over 10, you can see the corresponding fees.
David, I think our current system
Mhm.
for the apartments, one apartment unit, I think the water bills go directly to the apartment complex. Is that right? Anybody know? And that it kind of
Yeah.
gets divvied out from the apartment owner to the individual units?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, unless they were sub-metered. That's
Okay.
correct. So if you had a sub-metered situation where the individual units are metered, yeah. But if you're a 100-unit apartment, you'd pay 100 times $15.30 for that. And then, yes, it would be up to the owner of the property to recover the cost.
Mhm.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
And so the next slide just has some of our observations on the current fee structure. So in terms of residential, it is fairly common within the industry to have all single-family residential pay the same, just from an administrative simplicity standpoint, and the fact that generally impervious on single-family homes is somewhat homogeneous. But it's typically less common for multifamily, particularly to be the exact same as a single family. You may have it be less than or a fraction of it, but to have it be the same is pretty unusual. So we do have some equity concerns related to apartments and condos paying the same per unit as a single family home. And then in terms of the non-residential, you effectively have a pretty low cap on the stormwater fee for non-residential properties. So if you have 11,000 square feet of impervious, you pay basically the same as somebody with 110,000 square feet of impervious. So anybody above 10,000 pays the exact same. Another nuance is that somebody with the exact same impervious as a single family home pays substantially more if you're non-residential. So it's really not an impervious area basis as it currently stands. And so those are our observations. Next slide has some alternatives that we looked at. So the first alternative is really using more of a true industry standard approach, where you look at the impervious area on all parcels, come up with a single family residential fee, one size fits all based on the average impervious area, and then to do a measured approach for all other parcels, and then essentially have multiples of those fees for the other parcels based on the measured impervious area. This is the common approach, but it is data intensive and requires to have pretty accurate impervious area measurements, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. An alternative approach is to use really a modification of your current, which is to have a one size fits all fee for single family properties. For multifamily, to have a similar one fee, but base that on the actual impervious as it relates to single family, and then more appropriately sized tiers for non-residential. This approach would essentially allow us to keep the administrative simplicity in the current fee structure, but move towards more equity. And so, yes.
Dave, just a question about the, so with, I think what you ended up proposing to go for, or what we're moving forward with is the alternative 2, but I'm curious for alternative 1 is, have you looked at, is it worth, how much money it would cost to get the amount of data required to have to be based on the actual measured impervious surfaces, and if it would be worth that cost? Because I think the other potential benefit to that approach is it, in some ways, it may offer more of an incentive for property owners to reduce their coverage because it is based on more of a real amount, actual amount.
I am very sorry. I lost the first part of your question because I had an internet glitch. I froze for a second there.
Okay.
You were talking about the equity associated with using actual impervious.
So for alternative 1, have you looked at how much it would actually cost to get the data required to get the actual measurements of impervious surface, and if it's worth the amount that cost? Because it seems like that alternative could potentially offer an incentive, more of an incentive to property owners, because it would be based on the actual coverage.
Yeah, we haven't priced it out. It's one of the things that Sean is looking at in terms of, you're not hugely far off, and I'm not sure if you're super familiar with the coordinate system that was used in terms of your current impervious versus the property layers, and the fact they're using a different coordinate system. So that's essentially, there's just a misalignment right now between the property data and the impervious area that you have. And so it wouldn't be a huge lift. It would just take some time to get there in terms of bringing that measured impervious to being where it would be comfortable to be used as an approach.
I'm just wondering if that's a better system to be aiming for, because I think what you're proposing is, and what the plan is, to move forward with alternative 2.
Yes, the challenge would be, what we would recommend is to move to alternative 2 for the next year, and then over time move towards alternative 1 in the future.
So, Rob.
This is Joel from Office of Law. I have a question.
Okay,
Joel.
I will put you, Alderman Arnett, you heard you first. Did you want to?
Well, I agree with you. I like 1 better, and I thought a while ago we passed legislation to bring those coordinates in alignment, and I'm wondering what has stopped that. I had assumed that it was already done, but isn't also alternative 1 what the county uses?
It is. It's very close to what the county uses. It's a little bit more nuanced in the county, but yes, it is measured impervious.
So I kind of agree with you, Rob. I would like to get to 1 as soon as possible. Maybe that's a budget question or a priority setting with the city manager, but and I didn't think about it, but I like your notion of the incentive setting there as well. I think that's good. And David has his hand up.
Yeah, I would just say that the coordinate project is still moving forward. It's not completed, but it is moving forward. And I think that's why David Hyder mentioned that we want to transition to that. My strong preference, as well as David will attest, was for option 1. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to be technically feasible this year, but we definitely want to transition towards that. That's the better alternative.
Okay, and Joel, I haven't forgotten about you. But David, Daryl, what do we need, or from the other David, what do we need in terms of, like, to Alderman Arnett's point, in terms of what's the cost we need to plan for over the next few years to be able to move towards alternative 1? Do we have, it sounds like we may not have a firm grasp on that yet.
Well, I think at least immediately we need to finish the new coordinate that's already funded. It's in the CIP and needs to be finished. And David, I'll let you handle whatever is needed beyond that.
Yeah, once it's on the same coordinate, it would just be then making sure that the impervious area is aligning with within each of the properties, because we were seeing some misalignment there, and it's not a huge financial requirement. It's more just a time, depending, it can be a tedious process to make sure it's all aligned. And so it's not a huge lift in terms of, I don't know a dollar amount off the top of my head, but it's not a significant amount.
And are your estimates based on us transitioning eventually over to alternative 1, or is your estimate based solely on alternative 2?
So we haven't really factored in any costs associated with it in terms of the financial plan. So that, you know,
Well, I mean, your projected revenue, like the revenue you projected, is that based on that being raised on alternative 2 or 1?
It's based on alternative 2, but we would set them up so that they would generate the exact same amount of revenue.
Okay.
So it would be revenue neutral from that perspective.
Okay.
Rob, I have a question after Joel.
Okay. Joelle, yes.
Joel.
So no, that was actually my question about whether we want to cover the delta between our current fees and our current fees and basically the deficit. Is the deficit going to be made up using alternative 2?
Yes. Yes. So we kind of decouple them in that we say no matter what, we need 5% more revenue on the system next year from stormwater fees. And so we could get that from your current fee structure. We could get that from alternative 2, or we could get that from alternative 1. So any one of them would generate the same amount of revenue. It's just.
And then, so further to that, then, but that also equalize the payment such that our current process, which you said was probably not adequately burdening some people that really burden the stormwater system. Would that then also be a more fair distribution or equal distribution of the commensurate with the stormwater requirements that that the city is actually handling for the property?
Yes. So I guess the way I would look at it is right now we have some concerns with your current structure. Alternative 2 would move you in the right direction. It would address a lot of those equity issues. You could adopt that for the next fiscal year and then operate under that for 1 year if you wanted to, and then move to alternative 1 for the subsequent fiscal year. Or you could put alternative 2 on hold, keep your status quo as it is, just increase rates to get to that 5% more and potentially implement an alternative 1, January 1 or something of that sort. I don't know how long the coordinate project is anticipated to take, but I do believe that going to alternative 2 would certainly be a move in the right direction.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I guess we'll just have to keep that in mind for next year's budget.
Oh, okay. So am I?
Oh, Ellie, yes.
So am I to understand, because right now the capital budget has 0 for the proprietary grid system and 0 in future years. I mean, it's just basically 0, but the estimate is $460,000. So we are hoping to get that money. How?
That was previously funded.
Oh.
So no additional money is asked for this year in the future. We think that there's enough money to do that with the current funding.
Okay. And that is that Sean in mapping and all that? Is that in her?
Yeah, so
scope?
Sean's working with engineering together. So it's both of those groups. It's GIS and engineering that are working with.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. That's good news.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we can keep moving forward and look at just show you what alternative 2 would look like. And so under alternative 2, we have looked at actual impervious for all parcels. Again, it's not perfect, but if you were to take this type of approach where we're doing averaging and then staying within a range, we feel that it's accurate. And so what this approach would do would be to essentially say, okay, 1 equivalent residential unit or ERU is equivalent to 2,100 square feet of impervious, and that's the median impervious area on a single family home in the city. Multifamily, when we look at that, on average, they're about half that, so they'd be 0.5 ERUs. And then we would put non-residential in tiers based upon their proportionate amount of impervious. So the median for tier 1 would be the same as a single family home. So they would be between 0 and 5,000. 1 ERU from 5,000 to 25,000 square feet is 5 ERUs or 10,000 square feet of impervious and median, and then on up. And so as you can see, using this type of approach would really move you towards a much wider distribution of impervious surface for non-residential parcels. It addresses the fact that multifamily generally would have less square footage of impervious per unit. And so the next slide shows you what this looks like just in terms of a distribution. So this is the count of non-residential accounts and their impervious area within the tiers. So the blue shading is that first tier, 0 to 5,000. The orange is the next tier, 5 to 25, and then yellow, and that's just the third tier, and then the fourth tier. And then each of the bars just represents the count. So you can see you do have a fairly wide distribution.
So David, this is a new slide.
It is.
So I'm wondering, you said there's some others. If we can get the most up-to-date version of the presentation.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
I'll send that out. Okay, so that gives you just a sense for distribution. Most is at the lower end, but it is wide. And that we did cut this off just to show the range. You do have the Naval Academy has 1.9 million square feet of impervious. So that is your largest impervious surface for a property in the city.
Yeah, but a lot more in the orange than I would have guessed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does the Academy count in our, I didn't think they did.
No.
Okay.
Did you say the Academy's out of these calculations or in, David?
So it's not included here because it's outside the realm, but I do believe that they pay a stormwater fee. And I'll have to double check on that.
Huh,
Is-
that's
is that-
interesting.
Is that true for,
Don't tell them. Don't tell them.
Yeah, maybe
What
I
about-
better. Mhm.
what about the State House complex?
Yeah, it's included here. And they do
Well,
pay.
because they do, I guess, pay water bills then to the city.
Mhm.
They're using our water.
That's good.
Yep. As well as county properties. So we'll look at that. I think it's on the next slide, maybe.
Okay.
If we go to the next one. Oh, just before we get there, using this type of structure does result in a different number of billable units. And so since we're treating all single-family residential the same, the number of billable units under your current structure and the alternative would be the same, 10,068. Multifamily, essentially, you get a reduction in billable units there because we're not treating each apartment unit as one ERU. So you see a reduction in billable units there. But on non-residential, you'd see an increase within these tiers. The key takeaway is that with this structure, you would generate a little bit less revenue per ERU because you're having less billable units. So for example, if you had a stormwater fee of $1 under your current structure, it would give you $24,000. If you have a stormwater fee of $1 under the alternative, it would give you $21,000, just because there's fewer billable units because of the way we're treating multifamily as a fraction of an ERU.
But Rob, the ADU legislation will really up the number of multifamily residential units.
Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how much of a fraction of a full ADU is a multi-family unit?
It's a 0.5.
0.5. Okay.
Half, yep.
David, can you explain that 0.5? Is it 0.5 multiplied by the amount of units within the multifamily?
Correct. Yep. So right now, if you're an apartment complex with 10 units, you pay like your 10 single-family homes. Everybody, but what we're proposing is, given the impervious surface that was shown on the 2 slides ago, they have generally about half the impervious surface of a single-family home. So we're proposing that it would be, if it was a 10-unit apartment, they would pay basically 0.5 per unit. Yep.
Okay.
So the next slide probably helps illuminate that a little bit too. This now aligns the fee again with the 5% revenue increase. Single family at $19 a quarter, multifamily at half of that. So these just all correlate with the number of ERUs. within the tiers or within the residential. So this is what the fees would be. And then the next slide shows the impacts. And this is, I'm sorry, not yet. This slide shows the average impervious, just to give you a sense of range within the categories. So we were given from the utility billing system the classifications for different types of properties. So you can see that here on the left. You can see the total number of accounts that are associated with each of those classifications. And then the average impervious surface for each of those accounts, the maximum, and then the minimum. So as you scroll down the list, you can see that you've got some, government, state, federal. It's got some really big impervious.
It's interesting. Yeah. And where's for the apartments? Where that 501 is that units?
That's number of
units.
That's number of accounts.
Accounts.
That would be that master account, as you mentioned. So
okay. So probably per building. Each building would presumably be its own account.
Yep.
Or is it per building or per meter?
Oh.
What?
Probably meter, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's per meter.
Yeah.
So if you've got a building that's sub-metered, then it would,
Well, it's. We'll have to keep this in mind because I know there was some talk on the council about churches, and this kind of shows you how some of the large churches have quite a high amount of impervious surface.
Yeah. And we do have a slide that hopefully illuminates that, because that was one of the questions that we got from the finance committee. I think it's maybe the next slide, but
this is a new one too, I think, right? Can you go back a second?
Yep, that is a new slide. And you
that
can
other
see,
business is huge, 1.9
that's the Naval
million.
Academy.
That's the Naval Academy. Oh,
Yep.
okay. Yeah, hopefully. So hopefully we're not giving them any kind of break on their. I wonder how much we get. Can City Manager Gerald, could we get from Jody? I'm kind of curious how much we're receiving from the Naval Academy going towards our watershed fund. Or do you know off your top of your head if we give them some kind of?
Because, I'm not sure that they're billed, but I'll check. I know they pay for sewer because we handle all of their wastewater. They produce their own water. We handle their wastewater, but I'm not sure about stormwater, but I'll check right now.
So they have their own water, you said?
They have their own water system, yeah. So they produce their own water. They're our single biggest customer on the wastewater side by far.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they're not getting a water bill, should they even be in these calculations?
Yeah, according to the Munis report that we were given, they do pay a stormwater bill of $780 per year.
$780 per year.
$780.
That's a deal.
Well, and I think that goes back to the fact that, your current structure, nobody pays more than $198 per
Quarter.
per quarter, because
So nobody pays more than that?
Well, you cap it at 10,000 square feet. So, yeah.
So they pay 790, you said?
$780 is what the records are.
So what would they be charged under this new alternative? I mean,
Equal to the city budget.
that's right.
So they would be charged $1,235 per quarter. That would be the maximum.
Oh,
1,000 per quarter.
that's not bad.
$1,200 per quarter.
1,200. That sounds like a deal considering that impervious surface.
Yeah.
Oh, because so if you go back, where's your slide based on the units?
So if
The
you go back,
highest we have is over 80,000 square feet. Is that right?
correct.
So how many properties do we have actually going over 80,000 square feet? Is it worth having more tiers in there? I mean, right there. So you see tier 3, I guess tier 4 essentially over 80,000 square feet. So if you can go back to the previous slide you just had, I'd like to see how many are over 80,000 square feet. It seems like there are a lot actually. So what about your view? Why did you cap it at 80 when there are properties that are larger than that, much larger than that?
So there's 45 total parcels that have more than 80,000 square feet. And our thought was it gets pretty, I guess the distribution gets pretty wide once you're out there. So it gets more difficult to, you almost be, depending on where you draw it, you almost come up with a single based on actual impervious, and it gets more and more or less of an average or a median, I guess. So, I mean, you could, this question came up with the finance committee, you could have greater tiers.
Yeah, I mean, it just, at least as far as I'm concerned, it seemed like we should have, if there are properties that are well over, and it seems like there are plenty in terms of the retail, schools, even hotels, motels, government buildings, churches, apartments. Apartments aren't too much over 80,000 square feet, but some of these others, if they're contributing significantly more, and I mean, even if you look at retail, 258,000, that's, what, at least 3-4 times as high as the 80,000. That's, and they're only paying 1,200. That doesn't quite seem equitable or fair, all things considered. So personally, I'd really like to see some kind of higher tier.
And Sheila brought that up at finance, although she was looking for a way to exempt churches, which fortunately Dewan jumped to the rescue. I didn't have to, and said, hey, their stormwater is the same as everybody else's. But Sheila was looking for a revenue source to offset the fees for churches. I think I agree with you, Rob. Maybe another tier, at least for the non-residential biggies, might be a fairer thing to do to spread the burden properly.
Yep, I mean, we can certainly do that. You're just going to have very few in that tier, would be depending where you draw it. But
sure.
Remember these are just, this is the absolute maximum within each of these categories. So there aren't a lot, but
could I just?
Oh, go ahead, Alderwoman. Yeah.
Sorry. It just seems really skew for a group home. There's 20 accounts, but the footprint is only 1362. What is that? I'm just curious. It just looked kind of skew. It looked like maybe a high
A lot
rise.
of those are like single family residences, or they're very small.
Yeah, they are small.
Okay, so that's what it probably is then. Yeah. Okay.
And this kind of gets to my other point, which is creating an incentive, and I'll get to that more with one of your future slides, but I'd like to have the fee be more of an incentive to actually get residents, yes, but also property owners of these properties that have a huge amount of impervious, to get them to actually change and take out impervious surface or put in treatment. Because some of these facilities, including some of the many of the apartments we have, if not all of them in the city, they're grandfathered. They didn't have to put in any grandfather in terms of our stormwater management regulations. So they have zero treatment. And what kind of incentive do we have for them to actually do it? I mean, my fear is if you increase their fee, then they just end up passing it on to their renters. But I think it'd be nice if we could have some kind of system where maybe their fee, if they have zero treatment, their fee just escalates over a certain amount of time until they actually do something, or there's some opportunity opened up for them to work with a public-private partnership to put in facilities on their property using the Watershed Restoration Fund, but also some of their private money. I don't know, something creative like that.
Yeah, I mean, we did a similar study for the city of Ann Arbor in Michigan, and they actually have tiers. And one of the things they've noticed that as over time, people have taken action to drop down into a lower tier, because you see these spikes that happen at the tier breakpoints where people have, if they take out 200 square feet impervious, they drop into a lower tier, and therefore it had encouraged. So I think there is some precedent for that. You can also, the city does have a credit program that could be, I think, increased in terms of the benefits and things like that would be one way to do it as well. But ultimately,
Yeah.
I mean, you're right in terms of measured impervious being a big incentive to get people to reduce their impervious surface. It's probably one of the better ways to do it.
Was there
long-term.
another way to offer that incentive? Because it seems like that this focuses on just the financial incentive. Although I think, again, if you're well above 80,000 square feet, it's going to take you, you're not going to be able to get below that tier unless we do set up additional tiers beyond that. So I think that speaks to even the need to have those more additional tiers.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that we should be looking at for granting those, increasing the incentive and
I think
getting that change that we're looking for?
Yeah, I think the only thing I've seen is credits would be to.
Credits.
Yep.
And so is that, do you have recommendations on the credits in here? Because I know our credit program is not, it's not too robust because they don't, I mean, our fee wasn't all that much really. So
Right.
that's why it wasn't offering much of an incentive.
Yeah, no, that was not in our scope to look at the credits.
Okay.
Credit program.
So Alderman Arnett?
How much discrete information do we have on the bigger parcels? Because I'm thinking politically, we start to ding them more. They might be people with influence that we need to know about and anticipate.
So we have a parcel by parcel analysis that shows every single parcel's current bill and what they would pay. I know the billing folks are still combing through that and making sure they're comfortable that everything looks aligned and whatnot. But there is a lot of detailed data behind it.
So I think the committee might want to know more, get more detail before we start jumping around, creating a lot of additional layers that could invite some trouble. I mean, I don't know. And I think we should do the right thing and the equitable thing, but I think we ought to have a better understanding of who we're messing with.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, Alderman Arnett. And I think, rather than, as opposed to trying to get this essentially rushed into this year's budget, I think I would definitely like to add this to our committee's tasks for this next year, is to look at, maybe we can get that information, all the properties over 80,000 square feet, and then we can look at how to create additional tiers, because I do think it seems like it may be worth it, but I do agree we should dig into the data more to really make that determination. And David, I don't know if this is included in your, is your firm going to be have a contract with us for next year to work with us on any future changes, or is that to be determined?
We do have I think that would be to be determined. Generally, we've been assisting on an annual basis, so we certainly would be in a position to be able to help. But
okay, well, I guess we'll speak with the city manager about that in the future, then, I guess. And
yeah, and that would be our expectation. He's been with us now since I think 2010, so I think we'll keep him around.
Good. I second that.
I appreciate the endorsement.
go ahead, Alderman.
On the impervious mapping, are we working with the county in any way so that these definitions, could line up, or is there any coordination with Anne Arundel County? David, Gerald?
So that's a good question. So at least one link is the fact that David Hyder did their stormwater study as well. So his recommendations to us should help us align closely to what the county's doing. As far as the impervious areas go, we've got Sean, and she has a lot of expertise. I think when she needs help, if she does, like on some of the boundaries, she would go to the county and get that information. But it's Sean.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and I know she has on Parks and Recs, et cetera. So, okay, thank you.
And David, can you go to your next slide?
There's a couple new ones on the next slide.
Okay.
23. This one was shown last time.
Yeah, and that's
Mhm.
yeah. Go ahead.
Well,
I
and
did want
it's
to talk about this one.
yeah. This is the total number of accounts again by the classifications. This is what, on average, the quarterly bill is for that number of accounts, and then what the on average would be for under the alternative 2 structure, and then the change. And I know there's some concern about this, and it is a little bit misleading in terms of the change, because if you have one property in a small group of customers, or accounts such as churches, they can really skew this change. And so we do have a couple more slides that hopefully illuminate this a little bit more, but this does on average show as a class the average bill today, and then what it is under alternative 2, and then the change.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious too, looking at the housing authority number, and I think it's good. We do want that number to go down in the sense that we don't want those folks to have to pay much. I guess a better example might be the apartment complexes. Their numbers going down, and while again we do want those residents to be paying less compared to others, the actual apartment complex owners are the ones who have the pavement, right? The parking lot. And so that has no control. That's under no control whatsoever from the apartment renters.
Mm-hmm.
But currently, I'm guessing the apartment owners, the actual complex owners, are passing on the entire cost to the renters, even though it's not even up to them in terms of reducing that impervious surface. So again, it sounds like you're not really aware of any kind of other program that would help to target those owners, the complex owners?
It would have to be, that's a tough one with the apartments, because the way it's working right now is it's per unit. So every unit if again, you got a 10 unit apartment complex, every unit's charged like a single family home. What we did under the alternative 2 was to say, well, when you look at the apartment complexes and divide that amongst the units, they have generally about half of what a single family home does, even including their driveways and parking lots and things like that. So, one apartment complex is effectively like half of a single family home in total in terms of impervious, because that accounts for their parking lot and everything. I think the only way I can think of to target that correctly would be some type of credits, if you wanted to incentivize them to further reduce. But we do have a couple more slides. And the next one just shows the distribution of quarterly bill impacts. So this is the number of non-residential accounts that see a bill increase or decrease from their current bill up to the alternative. And so, you have a lot of these businesses that are between 0 and 5,000 square feet that are paying $61 today. We're proposing that they be treated because they have the same impervious as a single family, like a single family. So you see your biggest reduction is right there in that, in the smaller categories. You do have, the maximum that somebody would pay would be $1,200 per quarter. So those folks that are currently charged at your highest tier, which is about $200, would see about $1,000 increase per quarter. And that's the 45 up there. And then I think maybe the best way to look at this is on the next slide. And that shows the number of accounts that go up and that go down. So my point about the churches being somewhat misleading, you have 32 churches accounts, only 9 actually see an increase, 23 see a decrease. So you have a couple really large churches that actually, I believe, have schools as well that would fall into that top tier. So this gives you a little bit better sense of this is the number that go up, this is the number that go down, and then this is the average, the maximum increase that category would see. So we've tried to slice this a number of different ways to try to provide some transparency, but this is the impacts.
Okay.
And I believe that's it. So there are some new slides. We'll certainly send this around.
Thank you.
But it's,
Well, thank you very much. And I don't know if the committee has any other questions. I would like to circle back to David Gerald or Marcia Patrick about the Truxton Heights. But before I do that, are there any other questions for David Hyder?
No, but I want to thank him once again. It's a very thorough presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much for
I appreciate it.
doing that twice for us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. So Marcia and David, are either one of you? So I don't know if you were able to tune in, but just to, I guess, repeat my question, if I could find my CIP again. My concern was looking at one of David Hyder's early slides. It just showed a huge bump in fiscal year 22 in terms of bonds being utilized for watershed projects. And when I've asked him what it was, he said it's the Truxton Heights. And so we looked up the Truxton Heights in the CIP plan, and that appears to be, while I think Alderwoman Tierney said this year it's going to be mostly a feasibility study, which I would like to know more about. But it's calling for 2.9 million in watershed restoration bonds. And so I'm curious if that's bonds coming right out. It sounds like it's not coming out of our watershed restoration fund, and it's not going to impact our ability to get bonds in the future. But my concern is that this seems like a very traditional closed storm drain system that isn't really going to help us on our TMDL.
So I'll start with an answer, and then Marcia can add on. So when we originally had Greenvest on board, this was one of our most important projects for them to look at first, because we thought we could get a lot of stormwater credits as well as take care of a flooding issue in Truxton Heights. So they looked at it, and we definitely have flooding issues, but they didn't think we'd be able to get much as far as credits go. So we took it out of their court. We still need to address the stormwater issues there. But we took it out of their court and decided to move ahead on this alternative route of, doing a hydraulic and hydrology study, and then move ahead to design and then do construction. So we phased it in the CIP that way.
This is a study hydrology study, you said, for the installation of essentially a new closed storm drain system and associated. Yeah, I mean, essentially there is, and Marcia probably knows better than I do about this, I don't think there's much of a storm drain system at all existing there right now. That neighborhood was built without a traditional storm drain system. So this would install some of that through just closed pipes, some through, other BMP type things, open channels and things like that. Marcia, anything to add to that?
Well, not really. It was developed a long time ago, and I think it was developed somewhat piecemeal. And so the drainage there is really poor. Actually, some of the soils are so sandy too that they just don't hold grass well. And so I feel like there is a lot of erosion that just comes out of people's yards. So what we would like to do is, as David said, we want to put a storm drain system in, but it doesn't mean all curb and gutter. It could. I mean, I think we have to look at that. That's one of the things that we want to study, to see how we could do it with, environmentally friendly practices while keeping it, stable and safe for everybody. So it's a big project. It's very expensive to come in afterwards and retrofit neighborhoods with the storm drain system. And of course we would do water quality measures where we can fit them in.
Okay, and I guess what I'm concerned about is I don't doubt the need for storm drain system in this neighborhood. I know we have a number like this where there's zero infrastructure, and there's certainly a benefit to having that infrastructure. But my concern, I guess, is my concern is the high dollar amount. If it was a $300,000, $400,000 project coming out of our watershed fund, that to me seems fine. But if it's 2.9 million worth of bond funds that are being associated with our watershed restoration fund. That seems to me like it may be a little inappropriate to be coming out of that. And I'm just wondering, is that going to impact our ability to do other restoration projects in the city? Is it going to impact our ability to get bond funding for those projects because that's such a large amount? So that's what I'm trying to understand more about at this point.
Yeah, and maybe David could address that because that's all going to, that's going to drive what the rates are going forward.
Yeah.
I know that this project is very high priority. Alderwoman Tierney can weigh in on that because this is something that before her we were hearing a lot about, and now it's her turn to hear a lot about it.
Yeah.
As well, it's a very, very high priority project for them. So it's a
Yeah.
matter of prioritization.
They just rely on trench. They just rely on trench drainage. All surface drainage, and it floods like crazy. And I think we've done what we can with pitching roads and easing in curbs and all that. But just so what Rob is questioning is, I think, not this fiscal year 21, but the $2.9 million allocation in fiscal year 2022, of which, that's 2.9 of watershed restoration bonds coming out of the watershed fund.
Mhm.
Right, Rob?
I guess from my opinion and just talking with the finance director, I don't think there's any concern about being able to secure additional funding from bonds. I think the bonding capacity won't be an issue. As we talked about, Jody is adverse to using revenue bonds for a number of reasons, which makes sense. There's not a lot of differential in terms of the rates, and they do require significant expense in terms of the administration of them and things of that sort. So I believe there's certainly adequate bonding capacity within the city to continue to secure general fund dollars for capital projects.
I think, I think it's important to note that we've kept constant with the MS4 permit compliance, and we've kept that funded through, I guess, 2026 with $1 million allocated every year. $1 million.
Is that the green vest?
This is Stormwater MS4 permit compliance. It doesn't mention, I'm not sure why it doesn't mention, this is.
I think that may be the $1 million payment.
It has to be
green vest, right?
It has to be to someone.
Yeah, that's the MS4 cost.
Yeah,
and that's through Green Vest.
Yeah, I'm just saying that that's intact.
Right.
Well,
And
I
so
feel like I want to talk to, I guess, finance, because I still want to get a better understanding if this is going to hurt her ability or her Green Vest ability to get some of their projects done in the future and financed. Because it just, from my experience, if this was in the county, we often just absorb the projects that are a couple $100,000 for additional infrastructure. But if it was on this scale, we would be pushing it towards more of a traditional CIP as opposed to a watershed restoration funding project. So I'm still a bit concerned about that. And also, Alderwoman Tierney, the open, I forget what you called it, but the open swale system, that in many ways that's better for water quality, because once you start putting in pipes, you're concentrating the flow, which is going to be more impactful to your streams downhill. And so,
okay, field trip time.
So if this is being installed without any kind of green infrastructure as a part of it, and I think, David, you said you would look into that, but that's certainly part of my concern is if we go too much of the traditional route, would this actually be a net loss for our water quality? But anyway, I'm taking up a lot of time today. It's already 4:15. We can maybe continue this at a later time, but I do want to kind of get this answered to because it's obviously related to this year's budget and this year's CIP.
Yeah, Alderman Savage, I would just say that our highest priority absolutely is the MS4 projects. So we fund those first, and if there's space still available within the fund to do these other projects, we do those. But this type of project would never bump the MS4 projects.
Okay. So are there any other questions from the committee?
I'm good.
Okay. All right.
I'm good.
Thank you, City Manager and Marsha Patrick. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Thank you. And thank you to David and Matthew. And I guess we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. Oh, yes, Alderwoman?
Before David leaves, the legislation 08-20, Beth Bellis will not be able to join us. And I didn't know if David Joel had any information on 08-20 that would help in clarifying, because I think there's a misunderstanding about that legislation actually allowing stuff that it doesn't. I know it's down, it's later on in the agenda, but with David here, did you want to move it up?
Move what up? Sorry.
We're going to talk about 08-20, which is the Harbor Master
Yes.
revisions.
Yeah, we might as well. As soon as I can find my agenda.
But, well, I don't want to stump David. Are you okay with that, David?
I'm good. I'm going to stay here. I may turn the video off while I do other work, but I'll be listening. So I'll look at that piece of legislation to see if refresh my memory.
Okay. Yeah. Let's jump right into 08-20. Alderwoman Tierney, I think you are a sponsor on this, and what it looks like is essentially updating a number of our definitions and as it evolved in its own language, some obsolete language of our code. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say before I have a number of questions and about this.
Yeah,
so anything you'd like to say?
Well, my understanding, and again, I have to apologize for Beth. She had something come up, or else she'd be here. My understanding, and I may be wrong, is that these were some clarifications on verifying what we do now, and that wasn't clear. It's not like we're adding additional activities. She just revised the language to reinforce the enforcement that she's doing.
So you said Beth is unable to make it?
Yeah, she is.
Because if that's the case, I think I personally would like to postpone because my questions are going to be for her.
Okay,
in order
I
for me
didn't
to
know.
really understand and get comfortable with this,
Yeah.
I need to hear from
Okay.
her.
Yeah,
I mean, are you okay
texted
with that
her.
as a sponsor, or?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything timely on this. I just didn't know if David could speak in her absence, if he was deep diving into it as much as that. But she wrote the staff report.
She did, yeah. I mean, the staff report seems like it's pretty simple.
Yeah, that's
but
what,
maybe there's more to it than that, because I was just looking at the staff report.
Yeah, well, so David, I guess just for your knowledge, and hopefully Beth, if she watches this in the future, and I know Alderman Arnett has some questions himself, but for me, I had questions about and you may even know this answer, why Prince George Street was excluded from the definition of city dock, and what the rationale is for removing the noise restriction, why I can't read what I wrote. The water skiing prohibition, why is that being removed from city dock? Had questions about the whole holding tank. And the last thing I questioned about was it seems like it's just the as proposed to prevent anybody from tying up on the end of a street, tying up their dinghy, unless they have I forget what it's called, some kind of license. And I ran into this problem when I was commuting to work in my canoe. I'd tie up at the end of the street down near but anyways, back behind St. Mary's there, I'd tie up on one of those streets. And one time I did get I forget, a message or something from the harbor master's office, and it seems like that would prohibit people from just visiting downtown, canoeing downtown, which I do occasionally, or tying up for a little day trip, the way it's currently worded. So those are my concerns. I don't know if you would answer to any of those, and then we could go to Alderman Arnett.
Yeah, I really don't. It's probably better to have Beth here for those.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she has a clear intent on the docking specific to Ward 1. I know that there's people that are using their docking for permanent dockage and all, but she needs to speak to. I am curious about the Prince George Street language, but the water skiing, that kind of thing, is that we've never allowed water skiing, so she's just amending the legislation to existing situation. But all these others, she should be here.
I thought it would allow it.
Yeah, it's striking out the prohibition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
She'll
seems
have to explain
backwards.
that. It's like a double negative. Yeah.
And Alderman Arnett, did you want to highlight any of your concerns? Or,
Well, I had pretty much the same concerns, and I particularly have the concern about there's just been a long-going thing prior to Beth also about the whole docking at the street in parks, and I think part of that is another problem I'm having, which is not having the floating docks there. But it really does seem like we're trying to restrict it from occasional use where people are doing this to come dock and visit neighbors or family or so forth. I had a complaint about it from one of my constituents down at the end of, can't remember whether it's 3rd or 4th Street. I think it was 3rd Street, might even been 2nd Street. But I think this gets back to understanding the purpose of the street in parks, the purpose of the dinghies. There's always been a lot of fracas about the dinghies at the foot of City Dock in Eagle Alley, which I like to call Market Slip. And I think we need to get it. I think we need to get to the underlying intent of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and I think we have to be on the same page here, because I think we have to look at, I don't know how else to say this, of opportunities for missed revenue, if you will. So if somebody's coming in for a while, we want to veer them to, a public mooring. I don't mean just stopping at a dock, but, we don't, the problem is that the people were used to just keeping their boats at the end of the parks. And that's against the law, but they were allowed to do it. And then Beth came in, and she's very, per the legislation. So there's a lot of upset people that were used to putting their boats at the end of these public street and parks. And so, but I think that we have to look at opportunities there. That's all. But I'll let her speak to that.
Yeah, and I have a little bit of a problem with this drive towards revenue, but to me, a dinghy on a mooring
that's different.
Doesn't make sense. What are you going to do? Walk on water to get to the shore? I just don't understand.
She allows that.
You're a water ski.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there you go.
No, she allows that. She allows that in all my end parks. I mean, the liveaboards need to get back to land, and they just dock their dinghy, and that's no problem. This is just people that are permanent, permanently.
Yeah. Well, and we have that one letter from Jim O'Hare.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
Right.
Yeah.
That needs to get brought up too.
I really want to have a discussion about a balance with the harbor master operations to be welcoming and trying to generate a receptive attitude in the city of Annapolis, as opposed to having a bunch of rules, particularly rules that are driven by generating more revenue. I don't think that's the right modus operandi for our harbor master, and I'm not really sure. I've seen that growing in intensity. It has a lot to do with a lot of the fights over the use of the city dock and the slips there, particularly with visiting tall ships and that sort of thing. So we need to have some policy level discussion about where all of that's going.
All right. So is anybody want to make a motion to postpone?
Hey, postponing is my thing. I'll move we postpone until the harbor master can come and talk to us.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All right. And thank you, City Manager Gerald. And let's see, what else? What's next? We have.
Well, I still haven't gotten the update for planning and zoning, and it looks like we're getting perilously close to your 4:30 deadline.
I emailed it to you guys.
Takia told me, I think, that we don't have to stop by 4:40 like I thought we did earlier. But so we only have two more things left. We have the P&Z update and update from Environmental Policy Director and any kind of update from the Environmental Commission. So with that, Dr. Nash, are you on?
I'm here.
All right. So do you want to, let's see if I can find this over email.
I sent it at the beginning of the meeting, so it should be like around 3 something if you're looking at
Got
your
it. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so for this month, main update is 106, 108 Annapolis Street. We got revisions back for that project. We're actually getting fairly close to approval, I believe, of that project, which is retail on the bottom and 4 dwelling units above on Annapolis Street.
This Alderwoman Tierney, is this in your area, I guess?
No, that's Fred, but it's not the old bank, is it? Is it?
No, it's an old house.
Where am I? Oh, it's an old. Okay, yeah, that's.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Then 110 Compromise Street, they are trying to get before the Board of Appeals to get approval for the restaurant part of the building, and we're hoping that can work out and get on Board of Appeals agenda. I don't think we have all of our agency comments in yet though for that. Let's see. And then the only other issue is Rocky Gorge, where we had their permits had expired. They have appealed the determination that their permits were expired, but we haven't been able to have a building Board of Appeals meeting since COVID. We are working with them for them to reapply under one grading permit, and we think we might be able to work with them to do that.
For a brand new grading permit?
Right. That's what we have proposed to them. So we'll see if they want to go that route or continue with the appeal.
Yeah, it seemed pretty clear their permits expired per the code, but we'll see. It is kind of confusing though.
There were some strange
iterations,
circumstances. So yeah, I don't feel 100% about this one, but hopefully we're trying to work with them, but still see if we can get a better grading permit from them.
So would that open it up for a new site design review?
No, just the grading permit.
Okay, so there's no expiration on the site design approval?
They are vested for their plan development approval because they got building permits. So then all of their vesting sort of lies with this grading permit.
Would that require a new forest conservation review under the new regs?
I will double check, but I didn't think so. But I'll confirm that with Tom. I know he and Matt had some emails last week about it, so I will confirm that.
Okay, thank you.
And those are my updates. Are there any questions?
Newtown, could you just give us the status of Newtown?
Sure. Newtown 20 went to Planning Commission for our first virtual Planning Commission meeting. They had a work session, which we were nervous about, but I think it went generally pretty well. I mean, we were nervous about the logistics of having a work session, but it seemed like it worked pretty well.
Was my colleague Dawn there? Alderman Gay, was he there? Because I know he wanted to see the plans. It doesn't matter.
I was there, but I don't.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. It's hard to tell participants. That's fine.
Right. I don't think he was there, but
that's fine.
There's a lot of information online which we can direct him to if he wants to see them. And it looks really good. The Planning Commission thought it had too much parking, which they were pleasantly surprised to hear that comment. And they wanted some more recreation amenities and things like that, but generally their comments were, for the most part, I think they can address. And we are looking to schedule the meeting for the Forest Conservation Plan, hopefully next week or the week after that, sometime soon. So it's progressing along.
This is for Newtown?
Yes, for Newtown.
Yeah. Yeah, I took a look at the plans and they do look good. It looks like they will have a lot more trees after construction than they do currently.
And better drainage.
And stormwater will be improved.
Definitely.
Although I wish they would look at grant funding or something else to put in more pervious surface. Perhaps underneath the parking spots, to put permeable pavers or something like that. Because I think this could be potentially a really good demonstration project that the state and others may want to contribute funds to, since it is be helping to educate some lower income residents and a very diverse group of residents.
Are you ready to go? That's true. I think they're very willing to look at all kinds of grant opportunities. So they are pretty open-minded about that.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Dr. Nash?
Nope. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. All right, Director Gild, you are up. Like to give us any kind of update from your office?
Absolutely. Okay, so one thing that we are working with planning and zoning and public works was developing a greenway or identifying green properties to include as a map for the comprehensive plan. We started working on that right before COVID. We had a good meeting where we made assignments to identify properties that would be, that were identified through the Eastport sector study, that already are in conservation with the Conservancy Board. Other areas where we could, that are city properties and private properties, we could look at to connect to conserved properties, and those the city is already targeting to preserve, and give it for the idea of a greenway around the city where it could be biking, hiking, walking, jogging. Parts of it might be shared with the roadway. Parts of it might be green space that's part of a school or a cemetery, but would not be developed, with a housing development or commercial office space. So I need to follow up with everybody involved with that to see how we are progressing. We had hoped to get everything to Sally in May so that a draft plan could be included with the comp plan. Even if we don't finish it, we can continue to work on it. So I need to follow up on that and see where we are. Another project that has been ongoing for about 1.5 years is a memorandum of understanding with the Critical Area Commission so that we can use fee in lieu funds that we acquired for planting in the critical area, for planting trees. We can use those for other projects, such as shoreline restoration projects, living shorelines, for planting green cover other than trees. The problem is it's very difficult to plant trees in the critical area in many cases. So this fund just continues to accrue. There's about $80,000 in it right now. It's very difficult to use. So this memorandum of understanding would allow us to do multiple things with these funds, including contributing some of the funds towards shared grants with other jurisdictions, but for work in Annapolis, like a pool of grants. The Chesapeake Bay Trust does this. And that's one of the uses that were permitted in this memorandum of understanding. It has gone through several iterations back and forth, mostly between the legal department at the Critical Area Commission, DNR, and our Office of Law. And it's going through the final phase of that, I'm hoping. And it should be done in time for us to start to use the funds in FY21. Another project we have ongoing is our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. The last one was performed, I want to say in 2010. It's woefully out of date. There's been a lot of work done by the city on city buildings to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And it will not only identify where the city is and give us a good baseline, but it will make recommendations on ways we can further reduce our emissions, including our transportation sector. And we also will be working with the finance department to track our expenditures and what we're saving now by our more energy efficient appliances we've installed and other energy efficient activities we installed following the Honeywell audit, as well as from using solar for some of our power. So that's something we didn't have before that we're doing now with this inventory. We didn't have any tracking of what our savings were from reduced energy use. So going forward, we'll have that. This will be easier to update year to year with this latest update. Racine is working with Ann Stevenson on the Environmental Commission on this project. And this is her background. This is what she does. So we're lucky to have her input into that. We're hoping to have that done this summer. A little bit of a delay with COVID again and different things going on. So hopefully this summer that will be done again to implement as part of FY21. Let's see, other projects we have going on. OEP's been working with Public Works and Planning and Zoning to move along a number of restoration projects, including closing out the St. Luke's restoration project, moving along a project at Ellen Moyer Park at Back Creek. That's going to be a pretty extensive project there. I'm hoping to get that one permitted this week. St. Mary's is looking at a living shoreline project. We're working with them to move that along, have them working with Roberta Lehner to address the historic issues that will be involved there. That would be the largest living shoreline project to date in the city. The other one is the one over by the rowing club on St. John's property. Hawkins Cove is another project that's being proposed, another living shoreline project over there. And the SPCA property would be a stream restoration and living shoreline project. So we have a number of living shorelines, new living shorelines will go in within city limits.
Are any of those the public project, or are they a nonprofit?
The nonprofit, the Severn Riverkeeper is SPCA. That was taken off the city's Greenvest project list because Severn Riverkeeper successfully got a grant for that project. It will tie into what the city is doing upstream in the Timber Ridge community. Right across the street. And they've agreed to work with us to make sure that those two projects complement one another. St. Mary's is being done with St. Mary's is the grant holder with DNR on that project. And Ellen Moyer Park is with the Maritime Museum is the grant holder. Hawkins Cove is Spa Creek Conservancy, and St. Luke's was St. Luke's Church. So these are all nonprofit led initiatives. And then of course, we're moving along our Greenvest work. We're trying to finalize the final projects on that list and move forward. We have a meeting next week in Greenvest.
Okay, Alderwoman Tierney, you had a question?
Yeah, remind me of where Hawkins Cove is, I feel.
So,
Which,
sorry, go ahead.
Housing
Yeah.
Authority headquarters.
It's by President's or Shearwater, right?
It's the Housing Authority headquarters back. I forget the name of that road
Okay.
back
So
there.
it's not it's not the Shearwater side. It's,
No, it is the Shearwater side.
oh, it is.
Oh,
I guess it is. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
it butts, and it kind of ties into Truxton. People use that as a cut through to get to Truxton Park through there.
Mhm.
And that project, there was a restoration project done some years ago by Spot Creek Conservancy that's sort of fallen into disrepair. That needs a bit of uplift, and they want to expand to do a living shoreline there as well.
Okay.
And so
Thank
these are all nonprofit-led projects, and these are additional to the work the city will be doing through its Green Vest work. A lot of different things going on right now.
I wonder if we could get would the committee be interested in a future presentation, perhaps from Green Vest or the city's project manager for that? I'd like to get an update on what they're
Okay.
up
Yeah.
to.
So Betsy McCown in Public Works is our liaison with, and the person who's the project manager with Green Vest. So do you want
Yeah.
that for the next committee meeting?
Tentatively, yeah, and or update from you. I didn't mean to exclude you. I just don't know how involved you are yet with Green Vest plans.
So
but,
I'm part of the Green Vest team on the city team end of things.
Okay.
Betsy is our project manager, so we could do it together. That's
Okay.
fine. Yeah. And we'll have a better idea of where everything's going after this meeting next week with Green Vest. You know, we have things pretty much all the way hashed out. There's some final details
Okay.
on that project. And then we continue to move forward with EV charging stations. It's been kind of a slow road.
Jackie, sorry.
Yeah.
Hold on, another question. Alderwoman Tierney, would you? Oh, no, Alderman, I see your hand. Ellie, would you want an update on the same areas living shoreline, like more details from? I mean, that could potentially be a very important, big deal for the city. That's right downtown. That's going to be a very long length of our shoreline. But obviously, I think we need to get ahead of the public messaging here and make sure that you're comfortable with what's being. I don't even know what's being proposed beyond just living shoreline, but I'd kind of like to hear more about it at some point.
Yeah, no, I think it will just get a few ducks mad that use it as a mud pool.
Yeah, we've made sure that we have, they would make sure that they understand the historic hurdles they have to get through, that's probably, a big part of that project as far as the work they have to do, and to understand the process of the Historic Preservation Commission. So they have, with our advice, hired a consultant that's gone through the historic preservation process before, which will really help them. And so what we could do is Betsy could give the Green Vest presentation, and I could give some of the updates on the non-for-profit work, including featuring St. Mary's Living Shoreline.
Where
That'd be great.
where does the Brewer Hills Cemetery fit in any category?
It doesn't fit into those categories.
Okay,
It is a restoration project, which Hyatt Commercial will be doing the work there. That was on my list to get updates for yesterday, and I didn't get an update on it. So you just
no!
on that one.
I didn't mean to stump you. I'm sorry. I hate when that happens.
No, that's on my list of things to get to do, because I was just thinking about that the other day. Is like I haven't really had an update from anyone on that lately, and the last word I had was that Hyatt was redesigning the project a bit, but I think we may have reached an agreement at this point. So I need an update. So I'll have that for you next time.
Okay.
And Alderman Arnett, you had a question?
Yes, I don't want to do make work, but I really do find the P&Z update spreadsheet quite helpful. And I am trying to keep track of all these different projects. Like, I don't know of what you spoke of, Jackie, in the update is part of the watershed improvement plan and what are other kinds of things, but you've got an awful lot on your plate, and I think it's hard for me to keep track of all the different things that are going on. The nice thing about the spreadsheet from planning and zoning is it's something you can go online and check on when you're we're not in a meeting and it's something that you can just quickly get up to speed.
Yeah, I can do an Excel chart with what we have with our current activities. I have to prepare something for the Planning Commission next month anyway, so that'll feed nicely into it.
Yeah, so, and that would just be, an ongoing, we just get the updates instead of a recount. We can see what all the projects are, but really what Sally does, and Frank Biva developed this a while ago, is just indicate in red where there's some change that has gone on since the last update.
Yeah.
So it's easy to track.
I agree. I was doing a narrative for a while and it didn't seem like it was really being used, but I think in the chart form, it's a good quick glance kind of tool.
Yeah, I would appreciate it.
Okay, great. Be happy to do that.
And Jack, going back a second to the Greenway, I don't know maybe it'd be inappropriate to come to us too early. I guess when I want to yield to my colleague who's been here longer than I, from Alderman Arnett, but I'd kind of like to see some of the Greenway, any of the preliminary plans or something prior to even getting included into the comp plan, but I don't know if that'd be appropriate or not.
And what we're doing is we're feeding information to Sean Wampler, and she just keeps adding to green spaces. It can be a work in progress.
Okay.
She has most of these things, these properties already mapped from different plans.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sorry, I interrupted you. You were going on to something else.
So EV charging stations, we continue to add them with the BG&E program, which is the free installation, maintenance, and removal if necessary program. It's kind of slow moving. We've identified about 6 different locations throughout the city where we could be installing EV charging stations, so we can apply for those areas. Then BG&E's engineers go out to assess different locations where they would put the charging infrastructure. And then on city properties, it's very easy for us to proceed. The next one that was to go in was at the Westin and their parking lot to receive a DC fast charge and 2 level 2 chargers. But there's been some problems with the location, so they have to re-engineer and look at the as-built plans for the parking garage to determine where the best energy source is. So that is one location. We looked at Gott's Garage to put them in there, as well as the visitor center. The Back Creek Park, where the restoration project I mentioned is going in, is another location. However, we want to get the permit issued there first before we start adding charging stations to add another layer of complexity to the project. And looking for a spot in Eastport. My understanding from Tom Smith is that the project at the Eastport Shopping Center, the developer had intended to put in EVs charging stations there, but that's for the use of his building. And thinking about that might be something we can work out with the landlord of the Eastport Shopping Center to put in chargers there for people who are coming to the gym and to the other stores and restaurants there. We had already talked with the landlord at the Bay Ridge Shopping Center. Eastport, the liquor store there, Bay Ridge Liquor Store, was very interested and spoke to the other tenants, and everyone was interested in putting them in there. But the landlord may go with a different vendor than BG&E. So we're still trying to work that out. However, adjacent to that shopping center is the Eastport Library, and they're going in there through the same program with the county. There's also with the county, charging stations are already installed at the new library on West Street. So we will have some other charging stations that have gone in through the same program, but with the county within city limits. And now I'm looking for other locations in the city where we can put them downtown in Ward 1, Ellie's Ward. But we do have the challenge of going through historic preservation guidelines. So that's going to be a longer process. Part of it, reimagining that space at City Dock, we could put them in closer to where what am I saying? Near McGarvey's, that area down there where we know construction would not impact them. So that would be an area we could get them close to market space. That's where BG&E would prefer to put them, but that seems to be a little bit tougher.
Jackie, I saw a couple hands, I think from Alderwoman Tierney. Did I see your hand or just
Nope,
Ross?
just my highlighter.
All right, Ross.
So how interchangeable are these charging stations? I know Corey Bonney has a Tesla charging at the Harbor Point Inn. Is that, can someone charge something other than Tesla there?
You can't. My understanding is that you cannot charge anything but a Tesla on a Tesla specific charging station. Correct, Rob? He owns a Tesla.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
You can get adapters for Tesla to charge on anything else.
But you can do it, but from a regular charging station, you can get if you have a Tesla, you can have an adapter that can plug into any regular charging station.
So Corey's situation is interesting. He did it as a business decision because you can only go so far on a charge, and people map their trips so that they stay at bed and breakfasts or hotels that have these charging facilities. So maybe other businesses, maybe not on the main drag, but other businesses, bed and breakfasts or short-term rentals could be approached to have these charging stations.
Yeah, and that's
it would require that ADUs have them.
Yeah, right.
And that's how the Bay Ridge liquor
That'll
store
be
came to us.
4,000 of them.
But so in the private shopping centers, like where Bay Ridge Shopping Center, they came to us because exactly that. They wanted customers to have that as a destination where they would come and charge. And how we would do that on private property with this program is Bay Ridge Shopping Center would lease the parking spaces needed and a little bit of extra space for the infrastructure to the city for $1. And so we would, in effect, have a leased space there. I already spoke to the Office of Law. They're open to, whenever the landlord for that shopping center is ready, they're willing to work with them on that. So, that's an option. So we'll keep moving forward with different locations and try to get as many charging spaces in as possible. I worked on the legislation with Rob for the reserve parking spaces and the fine. And I don't know, Rob, are you planning to also add a time limit for parking in a reserve space?
Yeah, that's something I was going to wait till it gets to this committee. We can talk about that more at that time about whether or not. So, for example, if we wanted to restrict, so somebody can't park there overnight without charging, or they can only be there for a certain number of hours and not take up the spot. But those are, we can get into those later. Okay. Those details.
Okay.
Did you have anything else?
The other one thing I just want to mention is we are working on a urban tree inventory. It was last updated in 2006, and it's supposed to be done every 10 years, so we're 4 years behind. But we have a contract with the University of Vermont who did the initial assessment and inventory, and they are working on that updated inventory right now. It will not only identify our tree canopy, but will also identify potential planting areas for us. And that report will be done by the end of July.
That's great. And how's that being paid for? Was that in last year's budget?
That's last year's budget. We have $5,000 from last year's budget, which wasn't quite enough to do the project. But what they did, University of Vermont had another project in the Chesapeake Bay area that required the same kind of survey. And so we leveraged resources by them working on 2 projects at once.
Okay. Good. Do you have any information on the Resiliency Task Force? I'm not sure where that is since the legislation passed on the state level.
No,
or not the task force, but the
the group working group. You're talking about our working group, city work group?
Well, yeah, that and how it relates to the finance authority.
So the work that would be done, resiliency type of work, could be financed, now that passed the state. That task force is supposed to be looking at different options and how it would be implemented. Not sure where that stands at the moment, but I'll get you an update on that. And then we had our working.
I saw this city manager popped in.
Okay, hello.
David,
Is there something to add, David?
Yeah, so those two are kind of disconnected. So
Yeah.
the enabling legislation for the Resilience Authority passed. So we need to work together with the county to get that set up. And that's sort of on hold because of all the COVID stuff.
Yeah.
And then the resiliency plan that Dan Neese and Joanne Thrower were working on, they got it to a certain point. Sometime soon, Jackie is going to pick that back up and get that finished. We've talked about it, so she knows that. So that's not a surprise for her to hear this. But she's going to work in concert with Sally Nash as co-chairs of that group to get that wrapped up. So it's probably about 85 or 90% finished, but it still has some issues that need to be worked out.
And David, I don't know if it's possible with the timeline, but I think it'd be good to see that report when we get the legislation dealing with the proposed deputy city manager for resiliency and sustainability, just to get a firm grasp on what lies before us.
Yeah, I'd only wish it were more ready for prime time than it is right now. It's just not quite there yet. And Jackie knows the issues. So as I said, we've talked about it. Needs some work, but we need to get that cleaned up.
Yeah, and even if we could just get an executive summary or a brief outline, I think that would help, frame the conversation when that gets to committee.
Yeah.
I did have a question. I don't know how much other colleagues have looked at this quarter ending report that Katie Conley gave us today, but I'm looking at Office of Environmental Policy through the end of the third quarter. You should be 75% spent and you're 80% spent. And I'm just wondering, and the overspending is on salaries and benefits. Are you going to be able to make it through the end of the year?
Well, we are actually closer to 100% spent only because we have open POs for tree work that we've obligated already. We have asked, we'll be able to make it to the end of the year. We've asked for some transfers of funds between different accounts. And we had, through some sort of accounting error last year, we had twice the amount of money went into our telephone account that we needed. So we're asking for that to be transferred back to our tree fund, our tree maintenance fund.
Okay.
And also we took down a hazardous tree last year with our own funds that we've asked for that money to be transferred back.
Yeah, I think we already handled that in finance.
That's in the process. It just hasn't landed in the account yet. So with those transfers, we should be fine because we've taken care of everything we need to as far as work we need to get done. Everything's been obligated, in other words, towards work and contracts. Brian will be skimming a little tight, but he thinks he can make it until we get the next budget passed.
Okay.
Just has a couple of trees that may need to be taken down, so we really needed that extra funding to come through.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So that's all I have on projects we're working on. The other work that I've been doing has been on charter and code revisions for the mayor and city manager's proposed new position for resilience and sustainability. That's taken up quite a bit of time.
Yeah, we'll get to that probably at our next meeting, depending on how things go with the public hearing. Actually, I may not get to that. But anyway, we'll see. That'll be sometime in the future. That'll come back to this committee. Well, thank you for your updates, and I'd like to, and for all your work on this. This is a considerable amount of work. So thanks again. And I want to ask the Environmental Commission, Mr. Giblin, are you still with us? If you have anything you'd like to give an update on, or other comments you may have on anything that's been discussed today? He may not be with us anymore.
Yeah, well, as usual, we
He's
left him,
muted.
Here
we
he
left
is.
him 2 minutes.
I know. Sorry, Mike. Mike, are you there? We can't hear you, but you're unmuted.
All right, how's that?
There we go. Yeah.
All right, thank you. We met the other night on we spent most of our time on 2 projects. The Kitty Academy, which is a special exception for a daycare center. The planning staff has continued to negotiate the forest maintenance with the developer, but they seem to be at an impasse. Some months ago, we wrote a letter encouraging the developer to do a better job of trying to retain the tree canopy in support of the planning and zoning staff at that time. The planning staff indicates that they will probably write another letter, and when we see that letter, we may, as a commission, reinforce our earlier statement or just let it go and let the planning staff take it on from there. The other project we talked about at length was the Providence Point. We noted that there's been quite a bit of breakthrough in a number of the things the environmental groups have wanted to correct the loss of trees. And we came down to the conservation area that would be set aside in perpetuity. And there were 3 or 4 areas identified that would transfer in perpetuity without any development at all. And then at the last minute, it appears that Providence Point is slipped in some language that would allow them to expand their existing footprint 20 years from now. The environmental community that we've been listening to felt that this was a last minute swap, and we're unhappy with that. And so we're waiting to see what's going to happen. We're taking under review for ourselves the easement package that was in the revised application that Providence Point submitted. So we may take further action at our next meeting. So those are the 2 things we focused on last week.
Okay, thank you. And for the committee's benefit, in case you weren't aware, the Kitty Academy is being proposed next to, essentially adjacent to the True Value hardware store, about a lot or 2, I think, to the west of that. It's a forested lot. They bought, there's the one lot which originally was supposed to go townhomes, and then they tried to put the Kitty Academy daycare, and then they're looking to buy the adjacent lot next to that, which is also forested. And the reason they want to buy that is so essentially they can clear more space. So it's kind of, the saying about 10-pound bag, but this is kind of it seems like it might be a little much for this kind of a lot. The concern is whether or not they're going to be able to meet the requirements of the new known at loss legislation. This will be one of the first that's going through the process for that. And so I think it is important that it's held to the high standard. But they're trying to use some potential loopholes in our law, which unfortunately I think we might need to at some point go back and tweak a little bit. Forest conservation. They're apparently trying to get credit for doing selective clearing of the forest. And the intention of having selective clearing is that when you have a forest that's too dense, if it has too many trees, then all the trees get stunted and they don't grow enough. So the intention of this, the way it's worded is selective clearing is you go in there, you clear a few so you have a healthier forest. However, they're claiming that on this forest, which is not overly dense, and they're also claiming to do that on a conservation easement that's already been claimed under the previous development proposal. So there are a lot of things that need to get cleared up on that before they go any further. But that's just a little bit of background on that.
Rob, is it coming off of Forest Drive?
Yeah, that's another big issue with the egress is because, and they're aware, like people, essentially, if you're going, you can't, there's no turning lane there if you're coming eastbound on Forest Drive. So you actually have to drive all the way around, make a left onto Bay Ridge, and then make a turn. Anyway, it gets very confusing, and they're going to have to educate the parents about when they have to go and pick up their kids. It's going to get, or no, I guess drop them off. It's going to get confusing.
Yeah.
So that's another issue. But I haven't, the traffic part of it. I don't know if they've had to do a plan yet, a traffic impact study. And Crystal Spring, I don't know if I want to get into now, but there are some concerns. I thought that was getting pretty close to being at a good point moving forward, but hopefully they'll resolve these few issues. Mike, was there anything else you wanted to update us on, or anything on the agenda that we've discussed that you wanted to chime in on?
And not at this time, no.
Okay. All right. Any questions for the Environmental Commission, or requests for deep dives?
I wish you wouldn't take so much time with your reports.
Well, thank you for the work, Mike, that you and the Commission are doing. Please keep us updated on the what you find out regarding the Kid Academy and Crystal Spring and your other projects that I know you've been working a lot on the Greenway and the greenhouse gas that Jackie mentioned. So thank you. All right.
Michael,
So
are you meeting? What are you using for meetings? Are you Google something?
Yes, we use the Google Meet.
Poor man.
It wasn't my choice.
No, it's terrible. I tried to get into the Maritime Advisory meeting last night. I got in, but when it got to be my time to speak, I got bumped and never got back in. So I don't know whether that was by intention or not. But,
Oh.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
No, thank you.
All right. So,
Uh,
yeah, I hope we
Ross-
didn't break any time limits here. No? Okay.
Oh, wow. I'll motion that we adjourn then.
I guess Ross wants to stay.
I'll second that motion.
We have to meet the 2.5 hours to catch up with the Finance Committee. All right. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 See you tomorrow.